turning the seasons here, whether we're ready or not.
Yeah, we are. It is closer than further away, that's for sure. Despite the fact that we might have had some really cold weather in the last 2 or 3 days, couple of days, Sunday, Monday particularly. You know, we're getting much closer to the beginning of the season. The one thing that people do need to be really cognizant of, though, is their soil temperatures. When you get cold snaps that come through, particularly with heavy frosts, a little bit of snow on the ground, then your temperatures at 10 centimetres plummet very quickly. You know, they've plummeted to quite low single digit numbers right now. We're down around the 3s and 4s. So it takes some time now at this time of the year to actually get those temperatures back up again. People might have been lulled into a little bit of false security when we had you know, that sequence of northwesterly weather a number of weeks ago where we got to 20-degree days, and soil temperatures actually rose very quickly on those days, simply because we've got a little more day length on our side now. You know, it is lighter in the mornings, it's lighter at nights, which means that we have longer during the day for the solar radiation to get in and raise soil temperatures, and we've slipped past that period where solar radiation is at its lowest. We're now on the climbing of solar radiation. It lags behind the shortest day, so for about 6 to 8 weeks. So everything's on the move upwards now. But we do need to be very cognizant of those soil temperatures before thinking about when that irrigation season is going to start.
You don't want to be putting cold water onto cold ground anyway.
Well, it's not so much the cold water, unless you're taking it out of the canal from Mount Cook, for example, where it is going to be maybe 4 or 5 degrees. Our groundwater is relatively consistent in temperature. It sits around 11 degrees. So it's the fact that you will get the soil wet and then it gets cold again. It's very hard to warm up when it's wet. Right now, when we've got a small deficit and we've got air in the system, then it'll warm up much more quickly, and which is why everybody wants to sort of farm on light soils, because you get very early warming. Stones are a good thermal mass, so they warm up much more quickly. So it's irrigating inappropriately at this time of the year when your soil temperatures are just marginal, getting the soils wet and then getting followed by a cold snap that then gets the soils cold and they're very hard to warm up again.
I guess the other big thing is that you've got an allocation and you don't want to start throwing that around too early.
Yeah, I think the 2014-15 irrigation season has brought that home to roost a little bit. A large number of people exceeded their annual volumes. I haven't quite heard how Environment Canterbury is going to deal with those.
They'll think of something.
There will be some issues around that as all the compliance reports arrive. So a lot of that arose because people started early, didn't think about whether they needed to irrigate during a period in 2014 when it was actually relatively cool and we didn't need to be irrigating, and ran out when we most needed it in the late summer, early autumn. So I think it's probably a very good lesson to keep in your back of your mind. It's very fresh. Let's use water very sparingly if we can in the spring. Watch those soil temperatures. Only apply the small amount that you might need. I don't see us having to start right now before September.
That's good.
Which is a blessing. I mean, everybody was probably thinking about, and I know some people were seriously thinking about irrigating a few weeks ago when we had those balmy northwesterly weathers. Well, goodness, 2 days of that is not the summer. So let's be objective about this. Let's take some measurements. Soil temperature is really important at this time of the year. And we don't have much of a deficit now. It's disappeared a bit. It did develop a little bit for a while. It's disappeared now. It's going to take some time to develop again. Just put the irrigators away probably till about the beginning of September,
just
I think.
Back.
Yeah. And be very conscious of the fact that those annual volumes are there for a purpose, and while you might get a small wrap over the knuckles once, you won't get a small wrap over the knuckles twice.
So this is basically saying that you've got a consent to take so much water out of a well.
Yeah, and it's mostly associated with groundwater. I mean, almost everybody now that is taking water from groundwater has an annual volume, X number of cubic metres. It might be 500,000, it might be 1 million, whatever it happens to be. It is a consent condition, and it is very rigidly enforced. So
obviously there's meters on everything.
Oh yeah, I mean everybody, another issue as well, everybody that takes more than 10 litres a second should have a water meter by now. And if they don't, then that's another issue that will come home to roost if they don't have a water meter, if they're taking more than 10 litres a second. That should have been completed by November, that should have been installed by November 2014. So we're very close to a year after that event, so if it's not in now, then you're probably taking an unnecessary risk turning a pump on because somebody will be watching.
There'll be somebody watching.
Yep.
Somebody's going to drive up your drive and say, look, I've just come in to double check.
Yeah, and you know, look, it's they'll pull power records to see what you've done in the years that you should have been compliant.
That's a bit unsporting.
Well, I'm sorry, that's the way it is. And
yeah,
this
it is actually, that is the way it is.
And that is in fact a national standard. This is not a Canterbury-wide standard. This is a national standard. I mean, it was brought in about 2010, I think, from memory, and the first block was 2012, so all the really big tanks were 2012, November. Next block was 2014, and the next block will be 2016, November 2016. So it's not like we didn't know about it, and people didn't know about it nationwide, but if it hasn't been done, then you are a culpable party.
Well, you're breaking the law.
You are breaking the law nationwide, yeah. This is a national standard.
Yep.
So,
looking forward?
Oh, looking forward. Look, we're still very much in an El Nino type pattern. If you look at the weather systems that we're getting, we're not getting anything southeasterly or truly southerly. It's mostly southerly to southwesterly, which is very typical El Nino conditions for this time of the year. All of the worldwide, all of the weather organisations, NOAA, Weather Zone in Australia, NIWA in New Zealand, they sort of follow suit a little bit after the party, but everybody's talking El Nino type conditions for the spring and the summer, and for it to be relatively strong. And I think that's something we also need to take into consideration. It's here. The indicators are here. It doesn't guarantee that we're going to get that absolutely strong El Nino, but all the indicators of El Nino, northwesterly weather, hellishly wet on the west coast, dry over the eastern areas, just because of the weather pattern, with the wind directions and the vective wind coming down off the mountains. We're looking at El Nino type conditions for the spring and the summer.
It's going to be a very busy season, Tony. Thank you very much indeed.